Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Faith and Finance Forum, hosted by the Catholic Finance Association and presented by Aquinas Wealth Advisors. We have a great show for you today. We have Tom Hardin, also known as TipperX, the most prolific informant in securities fraud history. Tom, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
An honor indeed. Let's start with a prayer, shall we? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Saint Matthew, pray for us. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, amen. Tom Hardin, we've recently become friends, and I am so interested in your story. You have so much to say at the intersection of just morality and ethics and professional standards and doing the right thing in your professional life. And it's a real privilege to have you on. You've been talking to a few Catholic groups lately, I hear, right? Tell us more about that.
I have, yes. I just shared my story for the first time with the young Catholic professionals a few weeks ago now. We're recording in August of 2023. So it was the Fairfield County chapter in Connecticut, sharing my story and how the faith played a big part of that bounce back, the redemption.
Redemption, and that's going to be one of our themes today. Well, Tom, let's start at the beginning. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your family life.
I grew up in the Atlanta suburbs, so this is 80s and 90s. I was the oldest of three brothers, soccer player, got recruited to play at University of Pennsylvania. So I was a great student, public school, big public school in North Georgia. Then after about the first year at Penn, I realized that academics is more important than soccer, and so focused more on that and stopped playing soccer. But I think it sort of got me in and then got me focused on uh, majoring in finance there at the Wharton School. So really kind of was an overachiever, I'd say, the first 18 years of my life and into college.
So the Wharton School is a pretty good school, right?
Yeah, I believe it's still the top, at least the top undergraduate school of business, very competitive. And coming through a high school in Georgia where I was one of the top people, you realize when you're with the class of valedictorians from every spread in your class was the valedictorian, this or that, it starts to get very competitive.
You're a competitive guy and you're a high achiever and clearly a smart guy and you were an athlete. But what was it like being there amongst, kind of the best of the best when it comes to young business minds in our country?
Yeah, no, it was very humbling. Got the first C in my life on Econ 101 midterm. And I remember in college, the adjustment was tough because you only had your midterm, your final, maybe class participation, whereas you had those two or three inputs to your grades. And so in high school, we had many quizzes. You could bomb something and be okay. So I got that C on that midterm. And I remember calling my father saying, I hate to tell you this, but I got a C on the Econ 101 midterm. He said, Hey, you're at Wharton, just graduate. You've already got it there. Just this is the way it's going to be. And like, better to get to see when you're a freshman and try to learn from that and bounce back and learn how to adjust. So great advice.
Wow, incredible. So you're at Wharton, you're with the best of the best, you're hanging in there. What professional options did you consider coming out of the Wharton School of Business?
So at the time, it still is, the investment banking program was really popular, either go into like the Goldmans or the Morgan Stanleys or go into the consulting realm, the McKinseys and Bains and BCGs. So I was really focused on investment banking. I got an internship at DLJLA. So for younger listeners, they won't know what DLJ is. Donaldson Lufkin Jinrat. So acquired by Credit Suisse in 2000. Got a job in their Los Angeles office the summer before my senior year. So summer analyst, got introduced to those 100-hour work weeks. But I also loved it at the time. You're working all the time, but it was the people that used to work at Drexel, Burnham, Lambert. So I'm dating myself, but these were sort of the people that work with Michael Milken and the junk bonds. And I was getting exposure to people like Ken Moelis, who went on to found his very successful firm when I was, 20, 21 years old. So it was a lot of work, a lot of hours, but I loved, what I was doing, being involved in banking at that time.
And what specifically were your roles at that point? What kind of work were you doing?
Just doing a lot of pitches, so putting together pitch decks, trying to pitch clients on raising money through high yield financings. And the office there was the number one high yield firm on the West Coast in the US, number one office. So constantly doing pitch work. And it doesn't sound too glamorous because as anybody that was an investment banking analyst listening will know, sometimes you're sitting around all day and at 5 p.m., the managing director says, get this to me tomorrow, and you're there all night. But I was young and enjoyed it and learned a lot. It's sort of the boot camp of finance where in the 2 or 3 years, you probably get a decade of knowledge, and it's going to set yourself up for the next job.
And Tom, did you enjoy success in that role?
I was successful. I was invited back to be a full-time analyst, and so that was great. Senior year at Penn, just had to graduate at this point. I had the job offer, just make it through and get back there. And then when I went back to DLJ, so this is now in 2000, a lot of people I work with had left to go work at .com. So we're talking about the first .com bubble and boom. And once I got to about my fourth all-nighter in a row, I had sort of somebody said I was crying. I didn't even realize I was. And I realized maybe this wasn't for me. I tried to stick it out to 2 years. And then I got recruited by a friend at a hedge fund, which started a career change for me in the year 2000, right at the top again of that tech bubble. So I left LA, 75 degrees in December, and going to Greenwich, Connecticut, where there was like 10 feet of snow on the ground. I had a crazy snow that year. So had changed careers and changed, you know, parts of the country.
Crazy indeed. I mean, you're in your 20s, you're a graduate of the Wharton School of Business, you're doing investment banking, hedge funds, you got a little money flowing through your pocket. What was your lifestyle like, Tom?
Yeah, it was a lot of partying. Just work hard, play hard. In my 20s, I grew up Episcopalian, and it wasn't. We went to church on Sundays, and but other than sort of going to church, it was kind of compartmentalized. It wasn't like I was thinking about the virtues, through my work life. Just enjoying life in my 20s, work hard, play hard. Not any type of drug use or anything like that, but I'd say really into alcohol and just going out and partying, have a good time, and that type of thing.
So let's talk about a little bit about that Episcopal formation that you mentioned. So, baptized Episcopalian, you mentioned you're going to church on Sunday. Was that the full extent of your faith life, or was there anything beyond that?
That was pretty much it. Great grandfather was an Episcopalian priest, so it really ran through our family. Everybody is Episcopalian, but went to church on Sunday, and there was really only one time for service I remember. So if we had a soccer tournament, we weren't gonna make the 10 a.m. service. There was no Saturday afternoon services and masses as I know now at the Catholic Church. So we would miss it occasionally for that, but at least we would attend when we were around. But it was really, I'd say again, like compartmentalized. And I'm not sure if that's because I was just young and not really thinking about that. But and then when I went through college, didn't attend church at all, unless my parents came for parents' weekend that we go. But it
Which is
wasn't a big part
something.
of my life.
Which is something. I mean,
It
like,
was just something, yeah,
yeah, not
yeah,
everybody goes when the parents come for parents weekend anyway. So
right.
it sounds like you dipped your toe in the water, and it was a part of your life from the beginning, which is beautiful and good to hear. All right, so you're rolling along. You're moving to Greenwich, Connecticut. What was that phase of your career like?
Yeah, so I even enjoyed that more than banking. It was less hours, but it was more work where it was a complete meritocracy. So there
Nice.
was no politics. If you picked the right stocks, you can literally watch your compensation running in Excel, which has some negatives, which we could talk about too, I'm sure, about seeing actually what you're going to get paid at the end of the year. So at 24 years old at this point, my boss was 32 and had made 8 figures the year before writing up the .coms. And he said, look, you pick the right stocks, you're going to get paid. And so I loved kind of the flat environment, the meritocracy, 12 analysts. So it kind of felt like an NBA team where you're highly compensated potentially, but you can also be cut, and always reminded that, hey, I can be placed by the next kid out of the Wharton. So I'm only as good as my last stock pick. And there's a lot of pressure to perform put on by my boss, but also investors and hedge funds who are maybe only locked up a year, 1 or 2 or 3 years. And so if you're investing thematically over 5 to 10 years, that can be hard to do if there's a mismatch with the investor expectations.
Indeed. And how did you make good picks? What was your process?
So my process is really thinking thematically and just looking at who are the winners and losers. So when I had the opportunity, my boss tasked me with tech stocks. It was great because there was always winners and losers. And so some of my first picks were when Google went public, 2003, 2004. I followed them for a few quarters, and I figured out, you know what, all these five yellow page stocks, there was actually five listed yellow page stocks, are probably going to zero. And so I never got to see that trade play out because of other things that we'll talk about that happened in my career. But I remember thinking, pitching and writing it up, long Google and short these five yellow page stocks. And the great thing, if people aren't familiar with hedge funds, is you can be short stocks and long stocks. So no matter what the market does, and especially in tech, you can figure out winners and losers. So that was something I had written up. And then also, I remember once JP Morgan adopted the iPhone, the second iPhone, 2008, you kind of looked at BlackBerry and thought the clock is ticking. So that was another one again that I never got to see out. But that would have been long apple short research and motion at the time. So
So you mentioned it was a little dangerous seeing your potential compensation on the Excel sheet and having that as kind of, your, I guess your lighthouse. Why do you characterize that as dangerous? Why was that problematic?
yeah, because if you're seeing real time, it inspires a lot of short term thinking, which I want to talk about. And just I think it would almost been better if I was writing up these ideas, long Google short the yellow pages, and really had no idea if my boss was taking on these positions or not. And if I was more focused on the process rather than the outcome, that probably would have been better for me, especially in my 20s, just learning the business. In your 20s, you're just still learning, just like a student. But by seeing it and being so young and seeing that I was really driven to be much more short term, like what is Google going to do next week? It doesn't matter because it's a thematic investment over the next 3 or 5 years. But I was really starting to be focused on what's going to happen this quarter, and it became very short term because that was going to affect my bonus for that year.
Okay, that makes sense. So back then, I mean, early part of the aught decade, 2002, 2003, did you have any idea that you were kind of on the front lines of such a, transformative development in our economy and the stock market, just the explosion of tech and that becoming, by far the leading sector in our economy? Did you have a grasp of, that you were kind of, in this sweet spot of such a big story?
Yeah, I felt it, especially following Amazon, where it was always, famously never profitable. Bezos always just invested, and the stock market didn't like that for a few years, and it was sort of like, today maybe with crypto, where there's going to be winners and losers, or with the AI stocks, today going crazy. I mean, they're not all going to win, but you kind of had a sense that it's directionally in the right, internet stocks and AI stocks today. Directionally, that's where we're going, but it was hard to figure out who the winners and losers would be. But you kind of did feel like it was a big moment, but we did have to have a reckoning because of valuations and the certain business models that didn't make sense back then.
Wow, very interesting. What was your best pick back then? What's the one you're like, wow, I nailed that. I got it right.
Cisco Systems, it's still around today, but that was the big networking provider to companies and data centers, and so that was my big pick. I remember, and then being short optical stocks. So there were companies that provided optical networking, and the business models never made sense. They were never profitable, and it was always based on always putting bandwidth and laying pipe it through the ocean. And so some of these business models, it was just a matter of time. And the tricky thing is, I learned and it really got to me, is when you're short a stock, even if you're right longer term, if you're wrong the next 6 months and it goes up 100%, you're wrong.
Yeah,
So it can be very tricky to short stocks because the timing is all that matters.
fascinating. So, how long did you do the hedge fund stuff out of Greenwich?
So I was at the Greenwich firm through 2002. So 2000 to 2002. 2002, if people remember, was the first kind of tech recession. And my boss at the time, he actually just stopped coming into the office. I remember one day he called me and said, "Can you sit at my desk with the hedge fund managers have the 12, 14 screens? They have all these screens up to manage the portfolio." And I thought, oh my gosh, this guy's having a mental health crisis. I should not be doing this. Our investors would not like this. So I better start looking for a job. So I bounced around managing small portfolios at like prop trading firms for the next few years until I finally got called by a friend who was like 15 years older than me, kind of a mentor in the industry, saying he was seeded by one of the top hedge funds ever, Tiger Management, to start a hedge fund, and he asked me to be his junior partner. At this point, I'm 28 years old, and so that was a phone call I could never turn down. Getting the chance to meet Julian Robertson, who's passed, but one of the biggest names ever in the hedge fund industry.
Wow. So, what was that like?
That was also a great environment. Not initially not as short term. We were really encouraged to think thematically, but the problem was for me in my career is I had developed my network around many traders and analysts who were still very short term focused. So I was learning from some of the brightest investors that have ever been out there in the industry by being at Tiger in such a prestigious place with these other funds that Julian had seeded, and they were all thinking long term. But also, I still had this network of people who were trading much more short term. And to be honest, John, who I also suspected were trading on inside information at that time. You could see firms like the Galleon Group, very famous billionaire founder Roger Rotnam, who went to prison for some time, where firms like that would file their 13F statements every quarter for their positions. You could see new positions being filed and those companies being acquired, weeks later after the filing. So it just seemed like it was not being prosecuted at that time by the SEC. They were focused on something else. But to me, it was in my face. Rampantly at that time. So I was trying to balance my network of people who I knew were doing this, but I was trying not to get close to that line, and also thinking longer term about trades like Google and Yellow Pages or Apple and REM, longer term, and trying to balance that.
Okay, so this is interesting because I mean, you had proven yourself in a number of different financial disciplines, investment banking, the hedge fund work, making good picks, and now you're in a place where you're starting to, it sounds like at least, see the darker side of the industry. Do I have that right?
That's right. And really, at the start of our hedge fund, when we were seeded, we lost money in the first quarter, which really shouldn't have mattered, to be honest. Like once you start trading, you've only deployed maybe 30% of your capital. I mean, you're waiting for the right valuations on your thesis and the entry points, and it might take 6 months to deploy the capital you have. And so we lost money in the first quarter. And I remember my boss coming to my office, closing the door, and saying, Tom, I know we've been telling investors we're a 3 to 5 year thematic investor, but we just lost money in the first quarter. We have to start looking for these shorter term opportunities to make money every month. And so, just to sort of pause there, when any goal goes from 3 to 5 years to short term, the opportunity for people to start to make bad decisions or get closer to that line certainly starts to come into play.
Why is that?
Why why does that happen?
Why does it make bad decisions more likely?
I think anything with short termism, when you're not thinking long term, if you're becoming more maniacally focused just on the short term, what's going to happen next quarter, that's where you start to get into areas of like, where can I gather information to help me out to know about the next quarter? Could I talk to somebody who knows somebody who can give me clarity on the actual next quarter numbers? And so once you start to creep that closely to those next week, next quarter data points, you're going to find yourself more in murky waters just because of the short term nature of that.
Okay, so as you're starting to kind of see again the shadier side of the business, what's going through your head? Are you thinking like, hey, maybe I should, jump ship, maybe I should challenge this. Hey, everybody's
Mhm.
doing it, we're all making money, it's not a big deal. I mean, kind of what was your mental and emotional processing of what you were seeing?
Yeah, so I never felt that I need to be, find myself with the dark side of the industry there, the people that I suspected were doing it, because I didn't feel like I had the connection. So the way it was set up was several hedge fund analysts at these firms who I suspected were doing it had worked for tech firms in Silicon Valley, so they would call back to their old contacts for inside information, material information. But I felt that wasn't part of my world. I was a good sort of Excel monkey with valuation and projecting cash flows and DCFs and all that type of thing. And I was good at what I was doing. But I also felt like if I ever was in a situation where I had a tip, I'm not exactly sure what I would do because I have this pressure to perform, find something short term. My boss clearly knew this was also going on. So the ambiguous message he had for me to do what it takes, to meet shorter term targets, um, played a part in what's about to happen. And I'd also say just before we move on, like as the young analyst, I never asked a clarifying question to him. Hey, boss, what do you mean? This sounds very ambiguous. Are we talking about anything goes? Are we going to have ethical, legal guardrails for what we're talking about? We talked about Edge, and there was a book about one of these scandals called Black Edge that came out a few years ago. And it wasn't about, I didn't ask him, are we talking about this Black Edge or what are we talking about? So I kicked myself in my 20s not asking the clarifying questions because I think the boss was frazzled. We just lost money. And I think if I would have asked the clarifying question as the junior person, very important for people to think about, I think I would have snapped them out of it. Hey, I'm not asking you to insider trade. Tell them, okay, just wanted to make sure. So, but I didn't ask the questions. I just assumed.
You didn't ask the questions, you just assumed. Do you mean you assumed that he knew what he was doing, or that he was a leader you could trust? What assumption did you
Yeah,
make that led you to
I just
silence?
assumed. I just assumed that anything will go at this point, whether it's above the board or
Okay.
across the line.
Okay, and within the firm or within your team, was there anyone charged with I guess compliance or sustenance of ethical business practices. I mean, was there anyone who's was kind of that was their role?
Yeah, so there was nobody. So as a smaller hedge fund, you register at the time with 100 million in assets. So we had just crossed that threshold, and I believe just on paper, the CFO had to take on the CCO hat, but it was just if you had a CCO hat, there was nothing beyond that, just in terms of the filing. And so the only compliance training I remember, and it's certainly not an excuse for the behavior we'll talk about, is whoever was the general counsel of the firm that had seated us, or the compliance officer, would come downstairs for the once a year training with all the small hedge funds. And it was sort of rules and regs, which was more, I think, training for attorneys like, hey, here's the latest law, not like, here's how the law applies to you, analyst. And also, it was always, hey, guys, don't email anything you wouldn't want in the front of the Wall Street Journal. Go backstairs, which is still great advice, but there was no, and it's not an excuse for my behavior, but there's no substantial, memorable compliance training about this is material non-public information, this isn't, like these are the gray areas, nothing that I recall at the time around the 2007.
Yeah, so it sounds like, really the big message from leadership was, get it done, find a way to win as quick as possible. And we're going to have this one HR training or something or other every year. And, just be sure to be there for that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's box checking. Yeah.
Box checking. Very good. All right. So we have some initial warning signs, some stuff's happening. What happens next?
So the meeting with my boss, the short-term goals happens, and then I want to say 6 months later. So now we're in March of 2007. I get a phone call from another investor I knew in the industry who had used to work for this guy, Rajaratnam. And she says, "Hey, Tom, you've given me some great ideas over the years. I'd always say, hey, long Google, short the yellow pages." And she said, "I made a lot of money on your ideas, Tom. Tom, I have something for you, but you can't tell anybody." Now, looking back, this should have triggered some red flags, but I said, "Okay, go on. What do you know?" And she said, a Moody's analyst at the bond rating agency who was roommates with her cousin told her that Kronos, a tech stock, was going to be acquired in a few weeks. Here's the date, here's the price, here's the private equity firm. It's kind of like when I speak at universities, I say, imagine the test, the answers just fell into your lap. And so even though I had little training, I felt that that sounded like inside information. And so I'm not going to trade this. I told her, we don't, I know this is going on. And if you're doing it, that's fine. But like, I don't do this. But unfortunately, later that day, I was talking to a friend at a prop trading firm who I talk to once a month. He's down that month. We're talking, dude, are you hearing anything out there I could put a short-term trade on? Hey, I'm not going to trade this, but this woman told me, this Moody's analyst told her that this company Kronos is going to be acquired next week, date, price, private equity firm. Right there, I've actually violated the insider trading laws and could be at least charged by the SEC for insider trading. And I haven't even traded yet. So when you think about people listening who have access to this information, like you could never obviously share it, because even if you're not trading, you can be charged. He gets excited, hangs up the phone, apparently tells his whole firm. I see the call option starting to roll, and I think, oh my gosh, I'm starting to think, what have I done? And maybe 2 days go by, he calls me back. We're all in. Tom, did you buy some? And here's where I think rationalization kicked in. So when an employee crosses the line, there's usually three reasons. There's a need to cross the line. And maybe at my firm, we had a need. We had these short-term targets now. There's an opportunity. So the opportunity for me as the junior partner, I could initiate a position in the portfolio and not have to talk to the boss as long as it was less than 1%. I had several starter positions. Hey, what do we think about this? So I remember calculating and buying like a 0.9% position in our portfolio in Kronos. And the third reason people do this is they rationalize it. So self-deception by reasoning. I said, saying earlier, I told myself everybody's doing this. It's just a 0.9% position. I'll do it once. And I even rationalized that there was no victims that I was doing. I'm just buying it before everybody else. And it's actually, even today, professors write white papers on insider trading, like who was the victim. Not really part of this discussion, but that's sort of how you actually rationalize it. Just this one time, I'd never be caught. And if the boss has a problem, going back to that first conversation, he's going to ask me about this new position in Kronos. Hey, we don't have anything written up on this. So that's how I rationalize it at the time. I couldn't have felt some FOMO, like these guys are going to make a lot of money on this information I had. I should play along, but I should play along just enough where I'd never get famously never get caught.
Mm, wow. So what happened next?
So maybe a few weeks later, the deal happened. So it was a Friday, March 23rd, 2007. The market hadn't opened yet. I was in front of my Bloomberg, about to go meet with the partner for the morning meeting, the boss, and I see trading in Kronos has halted, word for word, exactly. Like she basically told me everything, the price, and I had a little bit of heart palpitation in there, thinking, okay, I was kind of telling myself maybe this is a rumor. I knew this person to be full of rumors before she ever called me like this, and so maybe this is one of her rumors. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this is actually happening. A little bit of a heart palpitation, but also after that, I hate to say this, but today this is what happened. I had a little bit of adrenaline rush. Like now I'm part of this group that knows
Hmm,
about this, sort of like a
interesting.
clandestine thing. That was just my gut reaction. And then, oh my gosh, my boss is going to ask me about this because the stock is up 30% now in the pre-market being acquired. And we go through the portfolio, probably 25 stocks between us. We go through every position each morning. What do we know? What do we feel? On that position, it's up 30%. He skips over it. We had no conversations about this at all. So again, he's the closest thing I had to a mentor. He's not asking me questions about my short-term performance in this position where there was nothing written up. And then that fuels the rationalization more like, okay, he is talking about anything goes. We're not talking about this, but anything goes. And so he's fine with this. And so that fueled it. And it would happen three more times. She would call 0.9% position. It happens. The boss at one point said, don't tell me how you're doing this, but this is helping us out a little bit. So we'll talk about maybe later tone at the top. Like that's a terrible tone at the top, right? Not asking about short-term performance and keep doing what you're doing, but don't tell me how you're doing it. So he was being an ostrich, with the head in the sand. So
Yeah, and it sounds like clearly the culture of the shop was, that's the way they incentivize performance. Find a way. You know what I mean? Just don't tell
find
me.
a way.
I don't I don't want to know. Just make it happen.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so the four small trades were it added 1% of performance. So looking at the whole year of 2007, I remember we were up 30% without the trades, and we were up 31% with the four trades. And so the firm made over a million. So on the 100 million, just 1%. And I remember years later, once I was involved with the SEC and FBI, seeing that I personally made $46,000 on these four trades at 29 years old. The price of ending my career was $46,000. That was a
Hmm.
tough pill to swallow. And I didn't
Hmm.
even ever think about the money. It was more about, I'm never going to get caught. These guys are doing it. I'll play along.
You're on with the Catholic Finance Association Faith and Finance Forum. We have Tom Hardin, also known as TipperX, the most prolific informant in securities fraud history. All right, so big day. The boss is happy, but things didn't stay so happy, did they?
No, the boss has been asking questions, four trades. So last trade was September of '07, and now we're looking at July of '08. So several months go by. It's July 8th, 2008. So picture a Tuesday morning in Manhattan, one of those July mornings where it's so humid and hot. I'm leaving my apartment at 6:30 in Midtown West to drop off some dry cleaning before getting a cab. Stepped on the sidewalk, and I hear behind me on 8th Avenue, "Are you Tom?" And it's 6:30 in the morning, and I turned around. And if you could just picture any TV show with two FBI agents, the wallets came out, the dark suits, FBI, come sit down with us. So there's a Wendy's right there at 55th and 8th. And he said, "Hey, man, we know about your four trades. We know, Tom, that you were just down in Atlanta visiting my baby nephew for his baptism that previous weekend." And I was. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, my dad's going to kill me, because I was just thinking about close with him. All he can talk about is my success. My dad's going to kill me with the FBI in my face. And then I thought, oh my gosh, my wife's going to leave me. We had just gotten married. She didn't even know about these trades. I never even talked to her. And I thought, oh my gosh, this might impact my career. I might be going to prison. So I start making implicating statements. Yes, I made those four trades. Here's how it happened. And the FBI is like, oh, wait, go on, go on. Keep going, keep going. And they said, Tom, do you know of this going on Wall Street? And I said, yeah, it's rampantly going on right now. I mean, there's this person from Galleon Group, other people, and they're like, "We think you can help us out, Tom." And I was just so naive. I said, "Should I talk to an attorney? What do you even mean?" And they said, "We'll let you know when you can talk to an attorney." So they play by their own rules. And That morning I was late to the office, so the market was about to open. It was like 9:25. My boss was like, "Where were you?" Like, oh, sorry, sorry, busy morning. Face is white, but it's July of 2008, the financial crisis, and my face was white probably a lot. We're just not doing well. Sit down, and I remember like my chest was breaking out in these rash spots. I was looking at myself in the men's room, like, God, this stuff's over my chest. Like I'm just really having these hives, and excuse me, I around noon, around the time I'd be going out for lunch, I decided to walk up to St. Patrick's Cathedral, a few blocks up from my office. I had converted to Catholicism through RCIA 2 years before I got married, and that was my first ever, experience with the sacrament of reconciliation, confession during RCIA. And I decided today I needed to talk to somebody. They told me not to talk to a lawyer. I'm not ready to tell my wife yet. They told me she was the only one I could tell, but I wasn't ready to tell her. I wasn't sure how to tell her, but I needed to talk to somebody. So I got in line at St. Patrick's, sat down there, and I remember the first thing he said after I explained what happened was, God's mercy is infinite. So that was pretty humbling, and I can't remember exactly what was said, but it just was, hey, if the FBI is giving you a chance to clean up this industry, you should do it now. My next conversation should have been with an attorney too. I didn't talk to an attorney for a year, but at least I got to say, speaking with the priest in the sacrament of reconciliation right there at my lowest moment was pretty big for me. And probably looking back now on my life, something that started to bring me closer to the faith. I had not really taken that seriously. I was kind of nervous to do it at RCIA. Like, this is very humbling, and but it's all about like accountability with reconciliation and confession. Like verbalizing like your shortcomings is like a really big thing to do. And for him to say God's mercy was infinite was just a big thing where, like, I don't want to say I was suicidal, but I was at my darkest moment right there. And then at least gave me some peace. And then he also said, I need to tell my wife, she needs to know. So that was easier said than done.
Was it your lowest moment because you knew you had done something wrong, or was it your lowest moment because you gotten caught at that moment?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it's because I knew I was doing something wrong, and that it had just been mounting up months and months. And then finally, the FBI years later would tell me I was one of the first people that once they immediately approached me on the street, I started confessing to them that it never happened. So it was definitely on my conscience for months and months and months, even though it was just 4 trades of the thousands of trades we probably did that year. It was definitely weighing on my conscience, and it was almost some going back to that approach. It was almost some relief, like, okay, I don't have to do these trades anymore. I mean, unfortunately this happened, but I started making, I guess, better decisions when the FBI approached me and then when I talked to the priest at St. Patrick's.
Yeah, it sounds like you looked at the engagement with the FBI almost as a chance, to borrow your earlier term, at redemption. Like recognizing that these 4 trades were wrong, struggling with that guilt, and it sounds like the FBI kind of in a way gave you a chance to move beyond that, right?
Yeah, I think I started, and I didn't really contextualize it this way until years later. Is that
Yeah.
like there was God's plan in action there and not my plan? I mean, my plan was never I was never going to tell the FBI if I was never caught, right? So it wasn't like I was going to go take my confession all the way to the FBI and call them and figure out. So it wasn't like that, but there was a different plan for me that I started to think about. They stopped me after 4 trades. What if it was 4 trades a year for 5 years and 20 trades, and my boss probably escalating bigger positions if he's not saying anything? And
Right.
then the FBI would have been in their, vest breaking down my apartment door, arresting me probably, and not giving me the chance to help them out. So there's a reason they stopped me that early and probably knew that they could work with me.
And that is the way it works with ethical breaches, criminal behavior. When you start getting away with it a little bit, there's a temptation to do a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, right?
That's right. It's the slippery slope. I should describe the incremental decisions where it was just the one trade, or maybe I won't even do it. I'll just tell the friend, and he's in it. I'll just buy it small. The boss isn't saying anything, and then you look up, and it started there, and then the FBI is in your face. I mean, this is the worst case situation, but that's how it starts. And so even today, I'll speak to professional services firms like lawyers and accountants, where timesheet fraud is a big problem. Where, hey, this client conversation was 30 minutes, but I'll just book it as an hour because I worked hard. And then once you do that and it sort of compounds over months and months and months, then you're exposed for timesheet fraud. And if you look at serious consequences professionally for that, and it does start with that first client conversation. I'll just book it as an hour, not 30 minutes. And then you rationalize, I'll borrow it back next month.
All right, so you have the confession with the priest at St. Patrick's, but there's some other people you got to talk to too. I mean, you got your
Yeah,
wife who's
yeah,
proud to be married to a Wall Street whiz. You got your dad
yeah,
who's always loved you and been proud of you. I mean, you're kind of like the golden boy, but
right,
now you got to tell
right.
them some other stuff about you, right? How'd that go?
That's right. So that was a Tuesday afternoon with St. Patrick's. Tuesday night, Wednesday night. The way I wasn't the great way to handle it, but the way I impulsively handled it was I would wake up so early to get into the office Wednesday and Thursday before she woke up to not have to deal with what I needed to deal with that conversation. And I just stayed at the office and would get home so late when she was, going to sleep or after she went to bed. So that wasn't the way to handle it. And then finally by Friday, I said, we can't go through the weekend like this. So I'm going to tell her Friday after work. And so she had actually been working at Lehman Brothers. So she had her own stories. She was in the real estate group there. And so when things were going down there, she was under a significant amount of stress, as also a young associate there. And after every Friday after work, couple in New York City, glass of wine. How was your week? Well, let me go first. And I said, you have to sit down for this. And she said, well, what happened? I said, Tuesday morning, I told her the FBI, I did do it, 4 trades, totally did it. And she paused, which what it felt like forever. And she said, can you repeat that again? That wasn't what I was expecting. And so I said it again. And she said, well, you didn't do anything to hurt me, it sounds like. I said, well, thank you for taking it so well. And she said, hey, for better or for worse, we'll get through this. You'll
Hmm.
figure it out, Tom.
Wow.
And 85% of marriages end right there when the spouse realizes the other spouse committed a felony, because usually the wife would be in it for other reasons. The future hedge fund manager, not for my uncertain future at that point. So it was certainly not easy, but the way she accepted it, I've never met anybody in my position who I've met several people over the years have been through something similar whose wife ever stayed with them. So
Wow, which says so much about her and your marriage. And man, that must have given you a lot of lift in that difficult moment. So,
absolutely.
what was the rest of your relationship with the FBI like after that?
Yeah, so I said I'm going to call the FBI Monday, let her know, and we went out Friday night to dinner at Russian Samovar. If people know, on the west side of Midtown, and had the vodka flight, I think, just to take the stress off. And then Monday, I'm going to call the FBI, and I met them outside in the East 50s at just like a table outside. And I was going to meet with them for the first time and go through my 4 trades and just learn about what they were working on. It was such a hot day again. I remember they had like a piping hot cup of black coffee for me, like they brought this for me. And thank guys, I have my iced coffee. This little thing. Sat down, and they said, "Tell us what you know." I said, "Well, there's some bad actors out in the West Coast, Silicon Valley, who I think are rapidly doing this." And for me, it was interesting because it wasn't like they weren't asking me who did I tip. They just said who are the worst actors. And usually you're in a position, if you're going to cooperate, that you probably tipped a friend, which I did, but I wasn't asked to help them with a friend. It was like, Tom, who was the worst actors in the industry? So I was able to sort of give them ideas of people who were much older than me, like very well-known hedge fund managers who I had no professional relationship with. And then remember they pulled out a little device that looked like a BlackBerry battery. So dating myself, but I'm sure people remember the Blackberries where the batteries were an inch or two big. I said, "What is that?" And they said it's a recording device. And I was like, "Oh, that's like a wire." And they said, "Yeah, we want you to wear this for us and help us build some of these cases." And so, again, I didn't talk to an attorney at all. I just was taking orders from the FBI. And the first, I guess, assignment was a hedge fund manager in Silicon Valley who I suspected was also insider trading as his business model. And so my cover story was I'd fly out to Silicon Valley for a conference with this in my pocket, meet him at Starbucks and say, hey, it's 2008. I'm interviewing around, probably going to lose my job. My picks are terrible this year. I knew about these 4 stocks last year, probably have more information. How do you do it? But if you're asking a very pointed question to somebody about a crime they committed, they're not going to immediately answer. There's going to be a pause and a change in subject. Like, why is this guy I don't even know that well asking me these questions? And the FBI was at the next table at Starbucks watching me do this because they wanted to make sure I wasn't going to slide a piece of paper saying, hey, Mr. Hedge Fund Manager, don't say anything, right? So they wanted to make sure I'm not manipulating this. And so they were there. And then I gave them the device later. I got really nothing. I changed the subject. I was so flustered. I thought he was on to me. And the FBI listened to it later back in New York City and said, "Hey, Tom, you talk way too much. You didn't do a good job." And I said, "Hey, guys, it's my first time doing this." So, okay, there was no training. Just give me some time.
And in time, did you get better?
I got much better. Waiting just for the silence, asking somebody about a trade or a contact they had that I suspected might be giving them information. You have to get comfortable with silence. So that was some of my training, kind of like negotiation training, where you want the other person to go first. And so you had to
Hmm.
wait. There's silence. And eventually the person would say enough where the FBI would tell me, okay, this conversation, there's enough there. And we've got enough to move on with that person. But this went on for like 2 years where I was doing this. Nobody knew who I was. At one point, there was a guy who was high up the FBI's list. I got into 15 conversations. He'd always change the subject. One Sunday, he invites me to Greenwich, where he lived, to go have dinner. And so I took the train up. I called the FBI and said, "This guy wants to have dinner." They got excited. Took the train out from Grand Central to Greenwich. He met me at the train station. He said, "Tom, good to see you. I brought swim trunks for you." Going swimming
Oh,
at my mother's house. So The Sopranos was popular at that time. All these ideas were going through my head. I played it cool, got into his car. We go to this house. He starts disrobing in this room. So he wants to see if something is taped to my chest. It's in my front pocket. I excused myself, went to the restroom, took the wire out, put these swim trunks on. We're walking out to this pool. It's so quiet. I see like a shovel against the house, a hole in the ground. I thought, oh my gosh, this guy gonna try to kill me or something. And then I saw some plants. So I thought, okay, landscaping, and then got in the pool. He grabs a tennis ball. We're playing this awkward game of catch. He's pouring it on. He said, "Tom, I have to ask you a question. Tom, you have to answer truthfully. Have you been approached by the SEC?" He just got his acronym wrong and said, "No, not the SEC." And he said, "Okay, I just had to make sure you weren't wearing a wire. Sorry about that." And so he was actually never charged because that conversation was not recorded. He was probably one of the worst actors out there. But yeah, it's a crazy situation where I thought my life was in danger. And that would go on until January of 2010, once my name was revealed. So October 2009, I had left my firm, and the first 20 people were arrested. My wife was actually giving birth with our first daughter in the hospital, and the FBI said, "Turn on the TV." 20 people were in handcuffs on CNBC, and underneath it said TipperX, TipperX. And people, I had no idea it was TipperX, and I figured it out after a few minutes. They didn't even tell me it was TipperX, and then I figured, oh my gosh, I'm TipperX.
wow. Was that the end of your work with FBI after that?
At that point, October '09, 20 arrests happened. I had no idea what I was doing for them was even leading anywhere until these people were in handcuffs.
Yeah.
And then December, I finally hired an attorney. He said, "Tom, you're supposed to hire me the first day the FBI approached you." I said, "Hey, I'm doing this. I'm just taking orders from the FBI." And so we went, pled guilty in court in December of '09. So the prosecutor, the judge, my attorney's there. And the judge, I remember it stuck with me. The judge asked the prosecutor, "Are the victims present?" And the prosecutor said, "There's no victims." And I thought, well, how do you almost rationalize it, because again, this, not the victim is the markets and it's not fair, but like at least at that time that was poignant. And then January of 2010, the FBI said they were done with me and we're going to release my name to the public. And so it came out front page of the Wall Street Journal, TipperX revealed. It was a New York Times story. At this point, I'm a stay-at-home dad with the baby, and people are stopping by the house, calling. It's a 24-hour story, but you don't know that when you're going through it. And my wife got home. The worst. So coming down to the second worst moment, maybe the worst moment I felt, other than even worse than the FBI and that first confession, was my wife comes home holding the baby, crying, saying, "What have you done to us?"
Mm,
That was
mm.
that was brutal. Like, she stayed with me through all this, and there's nothing at that point. I can't change anything from the past. I can just try to stave off these people. And then luckily the next day they went on to some other story, but at least for 24 hours it was rough.
Were you concerned for you and your family's safety at that time for obvious reasons?
Yeah, a little bit. I talked to the FBI about that once my name
Hmm.
was coming out. Because they kind of threw me to the wolves. Like, okay, your name's coming out tomorrow. I mean, I want to tell my parents. I want to get in front of this before this happens. And so, but done with me. And I talked to them, and they said, they had assessed the threat level of every target that I work with, and that they were comfortable with it. But I'm really just taking their advice on this.
Yeah.
But I did worry for the first few weeks when my name came out, would I be a target of anything? And so that the time just went by, and I kind of just stayed in the house, and I was sort of just like a stay-at-home dad, taking my daughter to the baby play groups, the dad there, and just sort of having this life where I could say, "Oh yeah, I used to work on Wall Street, but financial crisis, I left." And oh, by the way, don't Google me. Like, so,
What's your life been since?
so 2010, 2015, I'm finally sentenced, early 2015. Didn't go to prison, but still had to take a felony conviction. Could not find work at all. It's kind of like a career ender. You're not, nobody's going to hire you. Tried to start some businesses. And then eventually the FBI called me in 2016. I thought, oh my gosh, what do these guys want now? And they said I was the youngest person they charged, and I hardly made any money. I'm like, are you guys rubbing it in? They said, no, like we never understood like the why you did it. And I went through the rationalizations we discussed, and they said, Tom, every 7 years there's a major scandal or unethical or something happening in finance where they felt my story could be eliminated, a lemon situation. I'm like, what do you mean by that? They're like, do you know this guy, Frank Abagnale? I'm like, oh yeah, I saw the movie. They said there's a path for me to do that sort of in finance, go share the story as a cautionary tale. And so I started doing that, speaking at libraries in my county for free. For my first engagement was speaking in a library where there was like 385-year-olds in the crowd, just sort of like getting comfortable telling the story, very heavy story. And then it turned into a business where I brought it as a guest speaker during annual compliance training sessions or as a conference keynote. And I got to say the reactions from the audience has been incredible, just what people take from it. And I'm so lucky. Very few people have an opportunity like I have today to do this. And so today, my second career is a professional speaker and corporate trainer.
Wow, remarkable. So, what are the key messages that you want to get out about your absolutely remarkable story? I mean, what do you want the world to know and take away from what you've been through?
Yeah, so I think I want to start with maybe young professionals because I was in my 20s when this happened. I think you really, when you start a career in finance, there's always going to be pressures there, whether it's maybe it's not insider trading today, but it's something else, maybe mis-selling a product or your own version of your boss looking the other way or getting something unethical ordered to you or just do it just this one time. I think everybody has to understand what their core values are and you can't and stray from those. And I think we're very lucky as Catholics to have those cardinal virtues and just reflecting on those maybe through prayer, meditation. Am I embodying these cardinal virtues at work and in my life? And that's not even something I thought about in my 20s at that time. So if I could go back and in my 40s a day, talk to my 20 something self, that's something to have those core values that you don't stray from. Also, everybody's going to be in a situation in their career where they're at that line. It's in some way. Ask those clarifying questions. Again, I always, when I in my training sessions, we give examples of just the boss. It may seem like an unethical thing you're being told to do, just ask some clarifying questions. And if you can't get the answers, you might want to think about going somewhere else. People often ask me about whistleblowing. Look, that's a very complicated thing. There's different protocols for that, different reward systems and all that. If you think you're at a really bad organization, it's just easier to leave and go somewhere else. So that's one thing. I wasn't really thinking about, I was sort of thinking about, I guess, what do I want from life? I want to make a lot of money, I want to be very successful. And now I'm thinking about what does life or what does God in life, what do they want from me? And, that's a helpful reframe, I think, for like where I was in my 20s to like, what does this life want from me here? Um, you know, Going forward and thinking more about those eulogy virtues rather than those resume virtues I was always thinking about. So I think
Mm,
like we have to have both. We're working, resume virtues are important, but also eulogy virtues are really important. And for senior executives, I speak a lot at leadership summits. Just think about your messaging. Everybody has their sort of core values or something on the wall there. Speak up. But if there's hypocrisy, if the company is not actually living those values and speaking about them, then the employees are going to see right through it. And so I often speak at a company where they say, speak up if you see anything. And the young employees will tell me they're afraid to do that because they never hear back. There's no sense of organizational justice. So if you really have to live these values and you can't have a cookie cutter code of conduct where you've downloaded from somewhere and put the company's name on it and just showing people these terrible videos for training or like what I had in the past. Like you really have to get employee buy-in. And even some of the best companies have deputized ethics ambassadors where they actually sort of go around and espouse this. So you just have to live the values. It can't just be on the wall or something for the regulator or something where the law is like the highest requirement, where the law should be okay, this is the baseline, and what do we do above that?
All good points. Let me ask you this, like, in terms of, a virtues framework, yeah, you should do the right thing. You should do the ethical thing. You should follow the law, etc. But at the same time, you don't want to be somebody that's like always looking for, I guess, a violation, whether it exists or not. You know what I mean? You're so kind of, compelled by those types of things. You're always looking for, violations. You're always, like suspicious and not trusting your colleagues, your boss, etc. How do you know that I guess you're striking it right? That it's this is something that needs to be questioned and called out versus just being, I guess, overly concerned, overly suspicious.
Yeah, no, it's great. You don't want to be like the right. I know what you're saying. So I think you do have to go back to having those core values and living by those, but also being, commercially minded in our careers. Now we all have to be. We can't, have to think about that too, and can't be overly focused on catching people in footballs and that type of thing. And so I think where people sometimes get caught up in that is that they're thinking about, we need to have this culture of compliance, complying by the rules, but we really should be having just a culture of people doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And if there isn't a rule there, do people know the right thing to do? And so I often get brought in, hey Tom, make sure you say culture of compliance. Like, what do you mean by that? Culture of a bunch of rule followers, or do you mean culture of just doing the right thing? It's the same thing. No, it's not. Actually, it's not. So I think that's something important for companies to think about as they sort of think about their cultures and articulate this to employees.
You've shared a couple times just the incredible gift that your wife gave you throughout all of this. Really, just, I mean, superhuman loyalty. I mean, she must be a really special lady. Um, what about your faith? I mean, how did your faith, play into all this? Like, talk to us about, just what role God played in all the ups and downs that you went through.
Yeah, so I was, that second confession there, the day the FBI approached me, really brought me through closer to the sacrament of reconciliation. So that became a part of my life now and to this day. And it's just such a relief every time I go, just to sort of get that. And it's still challenging sometimes, even though I'm not committing any crimes today. But just it's challenging sometimes to be held accountable for that and verbalize it. Even so many times I've done it, it's still challenging to like walk in there. But then when you walk out, you feel so much better, and just having this conversation. And I think being like a more have a sense of humility now, where there is God's plan for everything. I hope to have the opportunity to continue to share the story the rest of my second career and leave this world with at least having done something about it, making the lemonade of the lemons. But I realize now that there's only so much I can do, and that He has a plan for me. And so I don't try to control as much as I used to, or that there's just another plan. And again, there's a reason they stopped me after the four trays, and then there's a reason they called me years later and asked me to speak about it. So that's where I am, and it wasn't my doing; it was His plan.
You seem to me like you were a good man that just got wrapped up with some bad people and made some mistakes. And we have a lot of people listening to the show that are good people too. But like all people, they make mistakes sometimes too. What are the warning signs that we should be on the lookout when you're starting to drift into I guess temptation, like
Yeah.
perhaps greater tolerance for considering doing something that's morally, ethically, legally wrong? I guess if you could go back to right before you made those four trades and, talk to yourself, what would you say?
Yeah.
What would you tell yourself to look out for?
Well, if I'm talking to myself, I'd want to be really aware of the most common rationalizations that pull people across these lines. And the number two that I've seen in my training over the years is everybody does it, which is never true. So if you tell yourself everybody does it, in psychology, it's the false consensus effect. Whatever it is, like that's not true. So you're already going to catch yourself. And immateriality is a big one. I kept telling myself my trades were immaterial. So it might be where the boss comes in and says, "Hey, what we're asking you to do is immaterial," or "Just sign this, it's immaterial." Those are warning signs. So if you can kind of put that in your mind, and some of my training today I do is have people develop muscle memory, like this is what it looks like, and the prep call with the client will figure out the exact example to use, and like that should be in your memory so you can flag it. but also getting outside my head would have also been very important. So I acted in isolation. I made a decision in isolation. There's no reason to ever do that. Had I had a mentor outside my firm, obviously not my boss, but somebody who I could have said, hey, these guys are doing it. She called me. I'm thinking about a 0.9% position. The right mentor would have slapped me around. Why would you ever do that? Here's that iceberg. Here's that reward, Tom, above the water, but here's that risk you don't even see underwater. And so I think I could have hung up the phone and said, hey, I just don't engage in this. And so it would have been very hard for me to override my mentor's opinion of me because I would have been letting him or her down. But it was very easy for me to override my own perception of myself and rationalize this. So I think sometimes when I was at Penn and read this case story of TipperX, I'd say that never would be me because I wouldn't do that. I really underestimated then once you're in the environment of this and once it's normalized, how you can acclimate to the environment, no matter how much ethics training you've had. Like it's really so much the environment that can influence you.
Do you feel like your work with the FBI kept the original promise of giving you a chance at redemption and to right the wrongs you had done?
I think so. I think it was the two agents. It was constantly good cop, bad cop. You're not doing enough. But I think there is a reason that they called me of all the people that they could have called at that time to go speak about what they were seeing again in the industry, and then to continue today. They even give me recommendations. So I remember my first corporate speaking clients. They said, "Do you have any recommendations?" I said, "You can call the FBI." They said, "That's good. We'll take your words. We're not going to call the FBI." It's good. So I think they've done right by me. Sometimes people will ask me, don't I feel like I'm a victim of being used? I don't feel that way at all. And I think, it's been said by other people that victimhood is a choice. You're not a victim. I have a great opportunity here to hopefully do this for a long time.
It seems to me like in some areas of law enforcement, consequences are becoming a little bit more lax. I mean, you'll hear about, just generally speaking in society, cities that have said they're not going to enforce certain ordinances or certain, codes of criminal law. It just seems like in a lot of areas, law enforcement is becoming a little more lax. Uh, and people are allowed to disagree with that, by the way. That's just my view. But what do you think about that? I mean, like, if I guess if people were more aware of the consequences of this type of criminal activity that you engaged in, do you think it would be more of a deterrent if they really thought they were going to face a severe consequence? I mean, like you said earlier, you lost out on a huge career for $46,000, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, so on my career, it's funny. I speak at a professor's class every year at a business school, and he worked in the industry before he retired, hedge fund. He did the math on where I might be 20 years into my career on net worth, and it was pretty sad to see. It was he calculated probably 23 million. So he's like, Tom made 46,000 to give out 23 million. I'm like, obviously, I was not thinking about that, but it's very humbling to see how that's calculated. I even shared that with my daughters now who are 13 and 11. And of course, they said, well, why'd you do it? I said, you're not thinking about that at the time. So that's just one piece of that. But yeah, I think even if the consequences were 100 years in prison, rarely are you ever think it's going to be you who's going to get caught. And I think even at the time, the consequences could have been 20 to 25 years in prison if the judge really wants to throw the book at you. That's what it says in the statute. I think most people feel like it's never going to be them who would be caught in these situations. So um, that's just something I think to think about. And also, yeah, I don't know, like if in the cities and all that they're not enforcing the laws. I mean, if law enforcement's hands are tied, it's not a good situation. And I think in the corporate world, sometimes the fines are so low on misconduct that it's sort of like the cost of doing misconduct. What's the price? So at E&Y, several accountants were caught cheating on the ethics part of the CPA exam a few years ago. And the SEC fined E&Y $100 million, which the SEC is a lot of money, but E&Y's revenue is $16 billion. So 100 million, less than 1%, the cost of cheating on the ethics exam for the CPA. So I think that's a challenge too, where the fines are just the cost of the misconduct. Unfortunately, that's what it seems like today.
Now, you may have a different view on this, but I feel like the financial services industry, banking industry, has become more regulated in the last 20 years. It's a little less Wild West than it was, say, when you were doing this stuff 20 years ago. Do you think we're making progress in this area? I mean, do you think that these new regulations, new criminal penalties, just reforms within the profession, do you think that we're making progress in interdicting this type of behavior moving forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're making progress, but also I want to say that the market is always ahead of the regulator, so it may not be, I mean, these cases still happen. This person calls this person, this trades inside information. That's an easy case, but I think the market is always going to be ahead of the regulator. So if we start looking at crypto and other things going on where the SEC is trying to figure out is a security or not, and like try to how do we enforce penalties, like the bad actors are always going to be ahead of the regulator of law enforcement, and regulator law enforcement will catch up, and it takes them a few years. So I think what has happened in the past has been really regulated and dealt with well. But the problem is it's always like forward looking. And because of government budgets and regulators overworked, underpaid, it's hard for them to keep up with what's going on in the market. So the next crop of what's happening, it just takes time to catch up. So to your point, we have done good with the insider trading, with financial crisis and all that, but like it's hard for them to kind of picture what's going to happen in the future.
And Tom, let's face it, it's really going to come down to leadership, right? It's going to come down to
That's right.
boards exercising their government's power, CEOs and other C-suite executives demonstrating integrity and showing true leadership. I mean, the criminal side of it, the government's role is critical, of course, but it's going to be about leaders doing the right thing, right?
Yeah, and it can't just be the tone at the top. I think that's an overused term. It has to be actually the behaviors, the seen behaviors of the leaders. I sometimes say tone at the top of my presentations, but it's sort of an overused term. And it actually is the behavior of leadership. Is that trickling down to the mood at the middle? The mood at the middle is more important than the tone at the top. And the buzz at the bottom is what drives all the behavior at the bottom. So as we work our way down, that's just important for companies to think about. But it does start there at the top.
Tom, these words that are thrown around so much in our culture, in politics, business, media, law, integrity, character, doing the right thing. What do those words mean to you now after the journey you've been through? What does it mean to have integrity, to have strong moral character? What do these words mean to you when you think about them?
Yeah, no, I think integrity, just as a simple definition, can be defined as doing the right thing when nobody's looking. And so, what is the right thing? Doing what's right by all stakeholders in the organization. And so, that's just like a simple way to think about what integrity is in terms of like how I talk about that in my presentations. Um, that's one way to think about it. But I think they are, to your point, overused terms where they're almost too cookie cutter in these codes of conduct and codes of ethics. So as companies formulate these, my guidance to them is to involve actual employees at the companies in the formation of these codes so that they're actually lived at the companies and they have these ethics ambassadors who are saying, what does it look like at this company to have integrity? Because it can really be customized to that company or that industry. And to your point, if it's just throwing around words that are just sort of cookie cutter and downloaded off some other's code of conduct or code of ethics, it's not going to resonate if it's not being lived and talked about in meetings with the senior managers and at the lower levels. So I think it's just important to continue like repetition about this. You can't have enough repetition because things are always going to come up where you haven't covered it in training and does the employee at least know enough to ask clarifying questions, as I talked about before, at least get to the right answer, get outside their own head.
How are you going to talk to your children about what you've been through?
So it's interesting conversations, and I can see their own slippery slopes, their own rationalizations happening at 13 and 11. Last year in seventh grade, my daughter was asking me for help with science for a while, and then she stopped asking me for help with science. I said, "Is it going well?" And she said, "Well, the teacher just we all just Googled the answers to the homework in science class." I said, "Oh my gosh, you have to sit down. Let me tell you how this can happen." So I guess it's bad for them because now I have like a sixth sense for the slippery slope when I say this is what's going to happen to you if you continue down this path. And they say, "Oh, Dad, you and your psychology and TipperX." But I said, "No, this is how TipperX happened. This would have been me in seventh grade if Google was around then doing the same thing, Googling the answers to the homework." And so it's a gift, I guess, in a way that I can say, "This is what happened to me." And when they were younger, "Oh, you're a criminal, what?" So that's hard for them to figure out. But now I can't change the past. This is what I'm doing about it today. Going out and speaking about every week to a company or an association or university. Hey, everybody, I'm about to tell you the worst thing I ever did, and I don't know anybody. So let's get let's get into it now. And so I think it's going to be a gift longer term for them, for at least for me to be able to share what happened and for them to understand it in their own way as they get older. And so, and I do catch them in the slippery slope and the rationalization. So it'll be fun to see how they progress, through life, having these conversations.
Well,
But you
that's
just start
definitely one
to
of,
see,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
you just start to see it early with your
Yeah,
children, just sort of, yeah.
me too. That's one of the things that you've really kind of hammered home for me is just the slippery slope and the rationalizations and avoiding those. And I think it's a good lesson for all of us. In terms of lessons, Tom, as we wind up our time together here, give us a parting thought. What would you like our audience to keep in mind as they reflect upon what you've shared with us today?
Thanks. I think everybody has their personal crucibles that they've gone through in our own ways in life, and it doesn't have to be something like me and TipperX and breaking the law. And I learned when I moved to New Jersey, I joined the Men's Cornerstone group. The first time I ever talked about my experience was 2 days after my name was released to the public, January of 2010. That weekend was the Cornerstone retreat at my church in New Jersey. And we went around and just talked about ourselves. And I said, here's my story, here's what happened. And the other men actually, many shared their own personal crucibles. And it was just such a moving experience to be around people sharing this. So I think these experiences can either define us the rest of our lives, which I kind of sensed it was for people. Like it was still nagging at them, whatever it was. It can destroy relationships. It can destroy people, or you can look back at it and develop it into something else. And so I try to look at it like I'm developing, and I'm constantly trying to improve and develop into something else by looking at myself now as being able to look back and share this with people, thousands of people I've talked to over the years about how these things happen and how we can prevent our own rationalizations and what that looks like. And so, define, destroy, or develop is the way I think to go.
Don't judge a man by his worst day. Redemption is possible. Tom Hardin, TipperX, where can we get more of you? Are you active on social media? Do you got a website? Where can we find you?
So I have a website, tipperx.com, and I'm not so active on LinkedIn. I post occasionally, but I do have a Facebook page too. I am TipperX, where I release occasionally short form videos just about things from the presentations or what I've been seeing out there. So feel free to follow me there.
We'll see you there, Tom. And we've been talking with Tom Hardin, better known probably as TipperX, the most prolific informant in securities fraud history. This has been the Faith and Finance Forum, hosted by the Catholic Finance Association and presented by Aquinas Wealth Advisors. We'll see you next time. Thanks again, Tom. God bless.
Thanks, John.